Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the 37th Annual Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism virtual celebration. Please welcome Kristen Gilger, Dean of the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communication. Dean Gilger.
Welcome. Thank you, Mike Wong. Welcome to the 37th Annual Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism celebration. Each year, we gather to recognize the accomplishments and contributions of one of the country's outstanding journalists. We've done this every year since 1984, shortly after the school was named in honor of Walter Cronkite, the legendary and longtime CBS News anchor. For many years, Walter was closely involved in selecting the annual recipient, and he would fly to Phoenix to personally present the award at a luncheon, a rather large luncheon, and spend time with our students and faculty. You know, of course, this year we can't be in a ballroom and we're on our own for lunch, but I like to think that Walter would have approved of this virtual gathering. He would have been grateful, as I am, to see so many people, journalists, communications professionals, students, faculty, staff, university leaders, and supporters of the school carry on, despite a pandemic and our not being able to be together. I want to take a few minutes just to recognize some of those who have joined us today. First, our students. Nearly 100 of them earned their way to this event by virtue of attending and blogging about lectures and panels they have attended over the course of this year. And second, our wonderful Cronkite faculty and staff, who are really, truly the heart and soul of everything we do. And then our alumni, graduates of the Cronkite School who continue to support and cheer us on from all over the school, all over the world. And now several individuals whose leadership at the state and university levels make all the difference to ASU and to the Cronkite School. We have Chairman of the Arizona Board of Regents, Larry Penley. We have Executive Vice President and University Provost, Dr. Mark Serrell, who you'll hear from shortly. Foundation Professor of Psychology and incoming Provost, Dr. Nancy Gonzalez. Dr. Sybil Francis, President and CEO of the Center for the Future of Arizona and co-chair of ASU Women and Philanthropy. Adrian Farewell, who has just been named the new General Manager of Arizona PBS. And our colleagues from across the ASU enterprise, including Dr. Christine Wilkinson, Senior Vice President and Secretary of Arizona State University and President and CEO of the ASU Alumni Association, as well as leaders from the ASU Foundation, including CEO Gretchen Kolvig. I want to extend a special welcome to members of the New York Times newsroom and to Mr. Baquet's wife, Dylan Landis. I saw Dylan there in the background just for a moment, who are joining this gathering to support the honoree. And to all of you who bought virtual tables and tickets to this event, your support, especially now at this time, is what keeps us going. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge members of the Cronkite Endowment Board of Trustees. This is a group made up of top leaders of the Valley who head news and communications companies, and this award ceremony is the board's signature event. Without them, it simply would not be possible. And a special thanks goes to Endowment Board member Christine Dotz, Senior Vice President at Broder Partners, who chaired this year's Cronkite Award Committee, along with many of our board members who served as committee members. Thank you. And now it is my honor to introduce my friend and president of our Cronkite Endowment Board of Trustees, Anita Helt, Vice President and General Manager of ABC 15 and CW 61. Anita.
Thank you, Dean Gilger. The Cronkite School extends its sincere thanks to all of our community partners that helped to make this year's Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism virtual ceremony possible. Especially in what I think we would all agree is the most unusual year, we are so grateful for your generous support, which provides critical funding for Cronkite students and future generations of journalists and media professionals. And with that, we want to acknowledge and thank this year's sponsors. First, thank you to our Cronkite Circle sponsors, including 12 News, ABC 15 and CW 61 Arizona, the Arizona Republic and azcentral.com, Elizabeth and Richard Burns and Morgan Murphy Media, Cox Communications, Deanne Griebel from the Mesa branch of Moores and Cabot Incorporated, and Ellie and Michael Ziegler. This year's President's Circle sponsors include Valley Sports Arizona, Bonneville Phoenix, and Raza Development Fund. Our Dean Circle sponsors are the Arizona Cardinals, Arizona's Family, Ballard Spar, Broder Partners, Clear Channel Outdoor, Cox Media, Reister, and the New York Times Company. This year's Leadership Circle sponsors include the Arizona Community Foundation, Arizona Diamondbacks, Arizona Highways Magazine, Cable One, Friends of Public Radio, KGJZZ, Hart and Associates, Mary M. Media, Orbitel Communications, the Phoenix Business Journal, Southwest Cable Communications Association, and Univision Arizona. And finally, our Supporter Circle sponsors are Anderson Jones Family Trust, the Arizona Broadcasters Association, Arizona Lottery, ABNet, the ASU College of Health Solutions, Fox 10 Phoenix, Gordon C. James Public Relations, Hubbard Radio, the Maricopa County Community Colleges District, the Office of the Senior Vice President and Secretary of the University, Salt River Project, and Urias Communications. So thank you so much to all of our sponsors for this, the 37th Annual Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism. And now it is my honor to introduce Mark Searle, the Executive Vice President and Provost at Arizona State University. Provost Searle.
Thank you, Anita. Very much appreciate that. Delighted to be here today, and good afternoon to everyone. And it's my privilege to introduce the recipient of the 37th Annual Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism, Dean Baquet, the executive editor of the New York Times. Mr. Baquet is one of the most accomplished journalists of our time. For the last 4 decades, he has lived out the highest values of journalism as a reporter and an editor. And he now leads one of the world's most significant news organizations. During his 8 years as executive editor, the New York Times has led the way in reporting on the Ebola outbreak in Africa, the migrant crisis in Europe, the plight of women and girls in Afghanistan. And he and his team have exposed powerful and wealthy sexual predators, helping spark the rise of the Me Too movement. And he revealed through the New York Times work the Russian interference in the 2016 election and documented the devastating impact of COVID-19. Under his leadership, the Times has won an astounding 16 Pulitzer Prizes. Mr. Baquet also shares a Pulitzer Prize of his own, awarded in 1988 when he was a reporter at the Chicago Tribune for exposing waste and corruption in city government. In addition to breaking stories, Mr. Baquet has broken racial barriers. He is the first Black executive editor of the New York Times in its 170-year history, and was the first Black person to lead the newsroom of the Los Angeles Times as well. From the time he entered journalism as a reporter in his hometown of New Orleans, Louisiana, Mr. Baquet has dedicated himself to the core values of journalism: integrity, honesty, and courage, those that Walter Cronkite held dear. Thus, it is with great respect and appreciation that we bestow on Mr. Baquet the 2020, we're a little late, but still the 2020 Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism, an award named after the most trusted man in America and given to the most trusted journalists of our time. Now, to learn more about Dean Baquet, please enjoy the following video tribute created by the Cronkite School's Isaac Easley, who caught up with him, not in New York, but 3,000 miles away near a beach in sunny California.
Men and women there? Yes, that's a good question.
Just talk a little bit about how we go forward, what thoughts you all have, are there bigger ideas, and what the coverage should look like. I'd love to do that. My name is Dean Baquet. I'm the executive editor of the New York Times, and I'm proud to be this year's Cronkite Award winner.
Dean is the best journalist in every room he walks into at the Times. He comes up with the best story ideas. He has the best instincts. Dean Baquet understands Times readers. He knows a good story when he hears it, and often he comes up with the best story ideas that we produce.
Journalism's like a party for him. It's just like, let's have a let's have a good time. Let's really go for it. Let's do something great. It's made him an editor that people just want to work for, to follow, to please.
I think growing up in New Orleans made me an empathetic journalist, I hope. A journalist who understood that the country's populated by different people with different experiences, and that was an important story to tell. New York is just like, once you sort of get into it, the mix of people, the food, the architecture is beautiful. It's a great city. I mean, I think the New York Times is the most ambitious journalism institution in the world. It really strives to tell people's stories with empathy and tell as many rich stories as possible.
I'll tell you how my relationship with Dean started in my hiring interview. After we had about a 2-hour brunch, he said, "Let's go shopping." And I thought, this is unusual. I've never had a prospective boss say, "Let's go shopping." Well, shopping really meant walking around New York, going into art galleries. We may have popped into a museum and talked about everything, all about investigative journalism, all about New York, all about anything and everything. The thing about Dean is that you want to be there for the ride. It's exciting, it's thrilling, it's fun. He's incredibly, he sort of walks in this very determined, very straight ahead, sort of fast-paced way. And that sort of explains his way with journalism. He's very driven.
I guess I think of myself as somebody whose ears and eyes are always open to stories. I mean, I'm always sort of thinking about stories and coverage, whether I'm walking down the street or talking to people. I just listen all the time. I read a lot. I'm out in the world as much as I can be. Now that I'm an editor, it's harder to be out in the world. I guess I'm just open to stories.
You know, our newsroom isn't always kind to outsiders, but on day one, Dean had won us all over. He made it look easy. He made us all feel that we were top flight journalists on a par with anyone, anywhere. He actually listened, which is rarer than you might think in a high level editor. And he so clearly enjoyed the hunt for that next scoop or the investigated piece that would kick butt. We all wanted to please him. And within a few weeks, it was as if he had worked here all his career.
I expect reporters to be fair. I expect reporters to tell the truth. And I expect reporters and hope reporters have as much pleasure in journalism as I've had.
I could see how much pleasure and joy he got out of being an editor. I could see the excitement when one of our stories worked out. I could see the excitement when he pulled us all together to inspire us. I could just see the joy he got in that. And I could also see just how much difference one person could make. And from that day on, I thought, I want to do that. You know, that looks like a great job. He was a real inspiration.
I remember him telling me once that he wanted to write stories that would make people gasp over their morning coffee. And that may not sound like the Dean of today, but it is still an integral part of his temperament and what makes him tick as an editor, as a journalist, as a storyteller.
Newspaper stories and all journalism should really make people gasp. My goal is to produce coverage that's fair and true, of course, but I like big stories. I like big news. I like big investigations. I think that one of the ways that we can change the world, and I'm a pretty idealistic journalist, is by doing big stories that make people stand up or sit up and think.
I've never met another journalist who is as much of a brilliant story idea person as Dean. The important thing is always the story. That's what counts in the end. And Dean is able to focus people on that story and not be distracted by all the noise that goes around them.
Dean is a part of a breed of journalists that, particularly in newspapers, was the kind of person you'd say had ink in his veins. He believed very much in the fundamental principles of good journalism, particularly of shining light in dark places and holding the powerful to account and providing voice to people who otherwise wouldn't get it.
For me, to be the first Black executive editor, I think it means a lot to Black journalists. I don't think I quite understood how much it meant until I started talking to younger Black journalists. But I've had so many people tell me how much it means to them about the possibilities for Black people, Latinos, and other people of color in journalism. So it means a lot. It means a lot to me. I think American journalism is starting to understand that there are many different stories to tell, and the only way to tell those stories is by having newsrooms that are diverse and newsrooms that look like America. So I think you will absolutely see more of it.
Thank you, Dean. We've, all of us who've ever worked for you, worked with you, worked alongside you, have been truly honored. And congratulations.
You deserve all the accolades and honor coming your way for what you've done for individual people and for journalism, for the New York Times, and really for the country.
Dean, even though you started off as a rookie, 9 years younger than me, you became my mentor and the journalist and editor that I admire beyond all measure.
One of the most important things about you, Dean, is that on the stories that are the riskiest, the ones that are hard to tell, you always have our back. And that's the most important thing of an editor of a major news organization. And the reporters and the editors who work for you know that.
You know, journalism personally has afforded me a life that would have been unimaginable for me or for my family. I met my wife in a newsroom. Journalism has just been, you know, I cannot overstate how much what it's meant to me. I would very much like to thank the Cronkite School for this honor, and I would very much like to say to future journalists, this is a great profession. You know, if you do it right, you'll see the world and you'll change the world.
Congratulations to our friend Dean Baquet, the 37th recipient of the Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism.
Thank you. Thank you. That was terrific. Oh, sorry, I screwed up the timing. This is why I'm not a television person. First off, just that was really remarkable. It was just like taking a warm bath in my life, and yes, I will show the award, which will live on my bookshelves in Los Angeles. Thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So now I'll speak. I'm honored. Thank you. At a time when we're all working to win back the trust of the people, after 4 years of relentless attack by a president, it is truly meaningful to me to receive an award in the name of a journalist known for holding the public's trust. It also means a lot to get this from a school that so believes deeply in the hands-on practice of journalism. I'd like to thank Dean Gilger, Provost Searle, and Dean Gilger also happens to be, as she said, one of my former Times-Picayune colleagues. I also thank all of my friends who, without my knowing it, gave video tributes. It was in fact touching. I love journalism in all of its forms, but I love reporting the most. Some of the greatest fun and the most profound moments of my life have taken place with a notebook in my hand. In fact, that is what I would like to talk about today. My theory, secretly shared by many editors I know and respect, is that one of the major crises in our profession is the erosion of the primacy of reporting. There are other issues, of course. It is vital that we diversify our newsrooms, and I will touch on that. Journalism is being reinvented now, and that is exciting, quite frankly. And I get the current debate about objectivity. My views of that will become clear in my remarks as well. But there is not enough talk about the beauty of open-minded and empathetic reporting, and the fear that its value will fade in an era where hot takes, quick analysis, and riffs are held in such high esteem, and where many journalists seem to have no use for the quotation marks on their keyboards, and where the capital I on those same keyboards seem worn. The dramatic drop in newsroom jobs has been widely discussed, particularly in local news, but it's worth restating, if for nothing more than the shock value. Between 2008 and 2019, newsroom employment in the United States declined by 23%. At least one study asserted that newsrooms cut another 11,000 jobs in the first half of 2020. Everyone agrees the decline is worsening. The pandemic has gutted the industries that are most likely to advertise. And the cuts are not only taking place at traditional news organizations. The struggles of newer institutions like the Huffington Post are further evidence of a crisis that will only continue. This is a profound and serious threat to our democracy. But I actually think that that's only part of the story. There's also the simple fact that news organizations have many more crafts than ever before, and most of them don't involve reporting. The product organizations and audience editors who have joined newsrooms in recent years are all journalists, important journalists. They are vital to our futures. They save the New York Times and other American institutions. In fact, we need more journalists taking on those roles. But these changes also mean that the average newsroom has even fewer reporters than their numbers show. Fewer people on the ground, fewer people making phone calls, fewer banging on doors, fewer with empty notebooks desperate for explanations and answers. So the focus of my talk today is why reporting matters, why it should be restored to the center, how honorable and wonderful it is at its best. Because I believe so much in reporting, this is actually a reported speech. I've spent the past couple of weeks talking to reporters and editors at the Times, BuzzFeed, and the Washington Post, collecting their stories, their surprises, their triumphs, and their lessons. I asked them to join me in reveling in reporting by telling me how they've been surprised, how they've had their premises tossed aside, or had conventional wisdom proven silly. Even how they chased a tip or a feeling in the gut. Prove to me, I asked them, that reporting is as valuable as I believe. Given that I don't get to do much reporting myself, except for internal memos, this was a lot of fun. As Jason DeParle, my former Times-Picayune colleague, who is now the Times' great chronicler of poverty in America, put it to me, quote, "The great lesson of reporting is that the world is almost always more complicated and unlikely than it seems while sitting at your desk." I asked Jason what had surprised him in a career in which he has written about poverty and deprivation around the globe. He recalled a time in the early 1980s when he covered the death penalty for the Times-Picayune. One day he drove deep into Cajun country to interview a man named Godfrey Bork, whose teenage son had been murdered by a man who was about to be executed. Bork wanted his son's killer to die. Jason didn't believe in the death penalty. He expected to find a bitter, angry man holding fast to a barbarian view. He had caricatured Bork and surmised how hardened and vengeful he would be. Jason got a surprise. He found a devout Catholic who was raising an adopted disabled boy whom he called God's special angel. Quote, "Beyond whatever I wrote for that piece, the encounter made me listen harder and more fully to avoid stereotyping." Jason said, "Sometimes you notice stuff in the field that doesn't make it into reporting, but still alters your perspective in an important way and makes you rethink your broader line of coverage." Years later, Jason learned a lesson about the generosity of the people he was covering, their humanity. Lessons you can't learn from your desk. For a story about people so poor they don't even have the fees to file for bankruptcy, Jason spent a chunk of time sitting in a neat trailer with a family in Morganton, North Carolina. Each of the three children had a genetic disease. Their bikes had long been repossessed. These people had nothing. But as Jason rose to leave, the father rummaged through a drawer and uncovered a pile of KFC coupons. He handed them to Jason, saying they were worthless to his family because they couldn't afford fast food. He insisted Jason take them. When Jason offered a few bucks to the children, so moved by the experience, the Bork family refused and told him he might need the money for gas. Melissa Segura of BuzzFeed, who won a Pope for her series on Chicago's broken justice system, learned the lesson of just leaving the office and showing up in person. She sat in the living room of a woman she believed had been close to a bad cop she was profiling. She showed the woman a picture of the officer. The woman stared for a second, then said she wished she could help, but she didn't know the man. Just then, a young girl in pigtails ran into the room, saw the photos in Melissa's hands, and shouted happily, "Grandpa!" Melissa turned to the woman and gently asked if she would like to start all over again. For the same story, Ms. Segura sat in the Cook County Clerk's office, where I have spent many hours myself, reading through more than 50 murder files. It was a Friday afternoon before a holiday weekend. Her eyes were blurry. She had read every file when one she felt was tangential turned up. Exhausted, but with the reporter's urge to know everything, she opened that one too, and found that the police officer's confidential personal file had accidentally been placed into it. My point is that great reporters out in the world looking for stories make their own luck. Jodi Kantor, part of the New York Times team that won the Pulitzer Prize for the stories about Harvey Weinstein's abuse, learned not to assume who the good guys and the bad guys are in any story. David Bowie's The Super Lawyer, the righteous slayer of dragons, turned out to be one of Weinstein's biggest protectors. Lisa Bloom, who had reached out to Jodi and her partner early on, portraying herself as an avid feminist, was actually being paid to smear the women who accused Mr. Weinstein. Jodi and other Times reporters learned another lesson. You have to keep going back, keep showing up, keep asking. The Weinstein story had its roots in 2005, when Bill O'Reilly was accused of harassment by a woman at Fox News. It stayed with me all those years. What had happened to that case? It was a different era, and O'Reilly had been able to dismiss it on his show. And he got away with it, until Mike Schmidt and Emily Steele went back and started reporting on O'Reilly's harassment of women at Fox. This opened up the rich story of Fox's history of sexual misconduct, which in turn led to O'Reilly's firing and eventually to the editors Rebecca Corbett and Matt Purdy, two of the greats, creating the team that broke the Weinstein story. Matt also ran the reporting that led to the most important disclosures about Donald Trump's finances, including his tax returns. The story was a master class in how reporters make their own luck by scouring courthouses, databases, and sources. Cameron Barr, the acting editor of the Washington Post, told me his paper learned the value of continuing to report and report in the face of denials when they set out to prove that National Security Advisor Michael Flynn had secretly discussed sanctions against Russia with the country's ambassador. This was one of the big gets of the early Trump era. Flynn strongly denied it. The Post did more reporting and came back. This time, Flynn said he couldn't remember. Then they did more and came back. This time, he asked if he could just remove his denial from their story. Sometimes trust in reporting comes from such relentless pursuit of the truth that the subject has to admit you're right. My last two examples come from the events of last year, when American cities were the scenes of protests following the deaths of Black men in police custody. The first is John Eligo's story about the days after the death of George Floyd, when the cry of defund the police was in the air. On social media, the debate was raging. Everyone was certain of their position. Certainty, by the way, is one of the enemies of great reporting. John, meanwhile, stood on a street corner in the predominantly Black north side of Minneapolis, where one scene, one discussion, showed the true complexity of the issue. He wandered up to a group of people in fierce debate. Some thought there should be community patrols, not police. Some wanted money diverted from police to social services. One woman wanted police in her neighborhood so they could stop cars from racing through at all hours. But she was also wary of police because they had falsely arrested her husband outside their own house. As John put it to me, if you only talk to experts or advocates, it is impossible to get the nuance and even the ambivalence of the debate. Finally, a story from Emmanuel Felton, a BuzzFeed reporter, relayed to me by Mark Schoofs, his terrific editor. Emmanuel wrote one of the most compelling pieces after rioters stormed the Capitol. He wanted to examine the way the Capitol Police handled the riot. With much evidence, Black Lives Matter supporters has said the police handled the January 6th storming of the Capitol with kid gloves, as opposed to the way they policed American cities last year. The police, of course, denied that. Emmanuel wanted to get past the easy debate and come up with a different take, perhaps some sources who could offer an unassailable truth. So he talked to Black Capitol Police officers. Quote, I felt this surge of excitement when I started calling the Black officers, Emmanuel said. What side of the line would they fall on? Would they side with Black activists or their police departments? This is the kind of reporting I love to do, he said, when I have no idea what a person is about to tell me. It is in these stories that we find nuance, and often people who have thought long and hard about these issues, but who haven't had a reporter pick up the phone to them yet. As it turned out, the Black officers did feel the Capitol rioters got off easy. When BLM protested, there was an all-hands-on-deck order. Not so for the Capitol protest. But Emmanuel also entered a world he'd never been in before, one with a rich and different view of policing in America. So what's the lesson of all these stories? Besides the fact that there's some amazing reporting going on in America, despite budget cuts, crises of trust, relentless attacks on the media. Every one of these reporters went in with an open mind and an open notebook. It is remarkable how many of them, unbidden, used the word nuance. They were not objective. No one is. Jason DeParle went in with his own view of the death penalty 30 years ago. I oversee coverage of law enforcement with a history of being a Black man from the South, whose father told him to always slow down when you see a police car and walk, never run. But they were open-minded. They went in looking for reasons to doubt their own conclusions. Each of them was open to having their assumptions proven wrong. To my mind, that is a good one-line definition of independence and fairness. A great reporter is always open to being proven wrong. At its best, journalism is the process we have built to come as close to the truth as humanly possible. We should be open to the challenges of that process. We should be humble about its limitations. We should learn that each generation will want to question it. One of my favorite quotations that I referred to earlier is from Bill Kovach, former DC bureau chief of the Times and editor of the Atlanta Constitution. Every generation invents its own journalism, he says. But with all those journalists I spoke to, different ages and different points of view, some from digital publications, some from traditional papers like the Times, some Black, some white, what they all had in common is they went out into the world, got away from their computers and social media. They were open-minded and empathetic. They tested their beliefs. Great journalism, as I said, is skeptical of absolute certainty. Of course, I don't mean they're skeptical of the existence of racism or poverty. And of course, there is right and wrong in the world, and we should call those out when we see them. What I mean is that these reporters did not see themselves as cheerleaders for anyone, and that even the best ideas are worthy of interrogation. I'd like to thank the reporters and editors who spoke to me for this. As you can tell from the quotes, they were eloquent and excited to talk about their craft. Maybe we don't talk about it enough. And thank you for this award. My life in journalism has been a full one. It is odd that I became editor of the New York Times, given that as a kid I'd never heard of the New York Times. Its mission inspires me every day, and the Ox-Sulzberger family, which has owned it unselfishly, is a national treasure. In fact, I accept this on behalf of them and all the editors and reporters of the Times and all the editors and reporters in Atlanta, Denver, and everywhere who are covering tragedies right now. I met my wife Dylan in the newsroom, and the life I have now would have been impossible without her. I made lasting friends, many of whom are here today. The joyous smile you saw on my face in those videos represents the truth. This life is fulfilling. For the students in the audience, I promise you, if you choose this life, you will have much more fun than anyone ever should. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, Dean Baquet, for those inspiring words. Ladies and gentlemen, on behalf of ASU Provost Mark Searle, Cronkite School Dean Kristen Gilger, and the Walter Cronkite Endowment Board of Trustees, thank you for attending the 37th Annual Walter Cronkite Award for Excellence in Journalism virtual celebration. Good afternoon.